Well, this week I was reading Newsday front page story about a very unfortunate happening on a Southwest flight. And immediately I called our aviation expert, Rich Kaplan, and I knew Rich would be all over it. So, Rich, tell us exactly what went down on this very unfortunate Southwest Airlines flight this week.
Absolutely, Howie. Flight 1380 is a regularly scheduled passenger flight from New York's LaGuardia Airport to San Francisco with intermediate stops in Dallas, New Orleans, Oakland, and Reno. This is the aircraft that they predominantly fly, the Boeing 737-700. In this particular accident, the initial report suggested about 20 minutes after the takeoff from LaGuardia, when the aircraft was at an altitude of 32,500 feet or 9,900 meters, a fan blade, if my videographer can look inside the engine, you can see the fan blades are in there. These fan blades spin at a very high rate of speed. One of the fan blades apparently broke off in flight, Howie, causing the engine to implode and puncture a hole in the fuselage in the window. Passenger was sucked out partially from her seat, and sadly she passed away. Now, the initial report indicates that the left engine suffered the fan blade separation, and there was a catastrophic loss of the engine's intake assembly and parts of the cowling. The cowling is the housing of the engine itself. This whole front section where I'm pointing to broke off in flight, exposing the engine itself. The debris struck the fuselage and the passenger window failed, resulting in an uncontrolled decompression. The torso of passenger Jennifer Reardon, age 43, who was sitting in row 14 adjacent to the failed window, was thereby forced partially out through it. Other passengers pulled her back into the cabin and performed CPR. Immediately after the engine failure, the aircraft banked 41 degrees to the left and the crew initiated an emergency descent. Oxygen masks were deployed to passengers, and the aircraft made an emergency landing at Philadelphia International Airport at about 11:20 a.m. A small fire caused by a fuel leak from the damaged engine was extinguished by firefighters, and emergency evacuation slides were not deployed, and passengers disembarked using boarding steps. Reardon died in a local hospital, reportedly of blunt trauma to the head, neck, and torso. 7 other injured passengers were treated at the airport. Parts of the engine's nacelle were found at several locations in Berks County, Pennsylvania, near the town of Burnville, and some 70 miles west of Philadelphia. The accident investigation itself is being handled by the National Transportation Safety Board, and in a couple of months we should know exactly what caused this. Now, personally, my gut feeling is that this was caused by metal fatigue, which is not unusual in commercial jets. Probably the most recognized incident involving metal fatigue was an Aloha Airlines 737-200, I believe, that suffered severe catastrophic failure of the metal above the cockpit leading towards the rear section where I'm pointing. This whole section, Howie, was sheared off of the jet, exposing the passengers to the elements. Miraculously, that airplane landed safely, which, to my amazement, is a shock, because I thought for certain after seeing the damage to this plane that this plane was never going to make it. But the Southwest jet is a different subject, because Southwest flies a twin-engine aircraft. You have 2 CFM56 jet engines, each one mounted on the wing. CFM is a joint manufacturing between General Electric and San Fran, which is a French consortium of companies that make jet engine parts. Now, the engine itself is very popular. It's used on 737s for American, United, Southwest, and Delta. So it's not unusual that when something like this happens, we are very quick to rush to judge. I'm not rushing to make any judgment. I'm not faulting Southwest. Southwest will get over this. Each passenger was given $5,000 compensation. So my theory is that what happened was an unfortunate mechanical failure of the engine. The airlines now, the FAA has issued a mandatory order that within 30 days, all U.S. carriers operating CFM56 engine aircraft have to have these engines inspected, Howie, utilizing what's known as ultrasound. Ultrasound can detect cracks in the engines that human eyes can't.
Richard, just as a layman, someone who obviously is not expert on aviation, my first thought, and I'd like to hear your response on it, is how unusual is it for a plane to have a accident where one passenger dies and everyone else survives? Talk about how unusual this event was.
Very unusual, because had the engine not punctured the fuselage, you wouldn't have any fatalities. So the fact that you have only one fatality is miraculous. I mean, this pilot was military trained. I believe she was a U.S. Navy pilot, if I'm not mistaken. She knew exactly what to do. She handled it calm, cool, collected, had total situational
So what
awareness.
I'm saying is, was the person who was a tragedy that she died, but was it just a case where she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time on the plane, and it just happened that the tragedy occurred in one spot, and unfortunately for her, terrible that she was in the wrong spot at the wrong time?
Absolutely. She was at the wrong spot at the wrong time. Unfortunately, on commercial jets, when we have a rapid decompression of the cabin, it's like, the best way to describe it is when you're a young kid, you would inflate a balloon. You put a very, very, very small hole in that balloon, you have air leaking. Well, the same can be said with where she was sitting. She was sitting, unfortunately, by the engine, and the debris hit, causing her window to puncture, and sadly, she almost got sucked out. It's unfortunate. It's not the first time that this has happened, though. On that Aloha flight, the flight attendant was actually sucked out of the airplane. So it's not uncommon. But I'm not saying that, when you fly, fasten your seatbelt and pray to God that you don't get sucked out. I mean, I'm not saying that at all. The industry is very good at policing itself. My producer brought that up earlier, that the airline industry has come a long way, Howie, since the early days. And we're seeing them police themselves. The FAA was very quick to issue this mandatory inspection. So I believe very strongly that this incident is just an isolated incident. It's unfortunate, but it's not the first time that Southwest has had an engine explode in flight. They had another one back in 2016. No one was killed, but it did shed light on the CFM program and on the CFM56 engine. So is there a flaw in the engine? I don't believe so. I don't believe so at all, because if there was, we'd be seeing a lot more incidents like this. But I do believe very strongly, though, that the industry needs to recognize that just like human beings, where we have to eat, we have to drink, we have to do what we got to do, the industry needs to make sure that these aircraft are inspected regularly.
Okay, excellent report, Rich, and we thank you for your expertise as usual, and our condolences to the woman and
Absolutely.
the family we lost in that tragedy. Okay.
Thank you.